From the forest there came a rider. Everyone stopped what they were doing so they could stare at the dead man as he rode into town. Jack looked up from the beam he was hammering. "Eyes on your work, boy," his mother said, but she was watching the dead man too, and Jack didn't like how tight her voice sounded. The dead man was too far away to hear them, yet his eyes found Jack for a moment, causing the boy to shiver. Black-clad frontier scouts, called dead men owing to the nature of their work, were a rare but not unheard of occurrence in town. Jack had never seen one look scared, though. Jack watched the scout disappear into the big house along with the mayor and Glenn and the Howarets and some others. They all emerged not 5 minutes later looking pale as coffin pine. It was a herd then, Jack thought. Going inside, hungry dead things are coming. No one in the area had seen a herd larger than 24 living dead in a generation. Some had hoped maybe they were rotting away out there in the old world, but now a swarm of thousands was ripping through the forest about to crash into the town like a foul wave. The bell began to ring and Jack responded, years of drills guiding him to the rifle over the fireplace and then out to his spot on the wall next to his friend Oahu and the Reverend. Jack noticed that the scout had found a place close to him on the wall. The man in black was younger than he looked at first glance. Maybe 4 or 5 years older than Jack at most. The scout's hand was trembling, but his eyes were clear. It began like Jack knew it would, only much faster than he expected. The morning sky clouded gray, then charcoal until it was midnight dark at noon. An east wind came crawling through the forest, bringing the smell of old meat with it, followed by cold rain. The smell got worse and worse until men were throwing up all over the wall. That stopped when the dead things came out of the forest. Jack had hoped that the town might hold off 1,000 creatures, maybe 200 if the wall and the men's nerve both held. But there weren't hundreds of corpses running out of the tree line, there were thousands. An endless dead sea crashing like a wave, for now, against the timber perimeter. The preacher next to Jack began to curse, and it sounded like maybe the scout was praying, but Jack focused only on operating his rifle. He loaded and fired 3 shots before the first emaciated face rose above his part of the wall. Jack's last thought was how human the eyes looked in their hollow black sockets. Almost sad, like they were sorry. I had met Robert on a dating app. You could say we were dating, but it wasn't anything official, more of a casual hookup. I don't remember too much from the first time I spent at his place, but I remember the terror I felt. It was a small place, a little apartment on the Upper West Side, a walk-up. We had hooked up before, but neither of us had ever spent the night. We were getting comfortable though, so I figured, why not? He had a cute smile, the kind that was confident but a little bit bashful. Robert was really what I needed after going through a big breakup with my ex. At some time in the middle of the night, I woke up with my mouth so dry that I could barely pry my tongue from the roof of my mouth. I rolled to the side of the bed, intent on going to the kitchen to grab some water. I stood at the side of the bed for a brief moment, and I felt a sudden shock as something ice-cold seized hold of my ankle. I shrieked loud enough for the neighbors to hear, and I bounded back onto the bed. Robert woke up confused. I tried explaining to him what had happened, but given my state, I must have not done a great job. We turned on the lights and checked the room. There was nothing out of the ordinary. He listened patiently as I told him about what I felt, but when looking in his eyes, I got the feeling that he didn't believe me. Eventually, I was able to get back to bed after convincing myself that it could have just been a cold draft or the metal of the bed frame. Still, though, I didn't forget the fright it gave me. From then on, when I found myself staying over at Robert's place, I never got up in the middle of the night. I only got into and out of the bed when the lights were still on. Then, one morning, I opened my eyes and felt something was wrong. I went to sit up. Nothing. I couldn't sit up. I felt myself start sinking, but it wasn't my body sinking. I began to see my body hovering over me. I was sinking, but my body was staying in the same place. As I sank, I watched my body get up on its own and walk away. I descended below the bed where all I could hear was the screaming of other women who had met the same fate. Now my life is torture, living beneath this bed. I see him bring other women into his apartment, trying to add another soul to his collection. I try to warn them, but all they feel is a moment of terror when my cold hand grabs him by the ankle. Numb, that's the word I use to describe myself. Emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically numb with just enough motivation to pay rent. I wake up, go to work, go home, eat, watch TV, and go to bed. I never liked that life, but I never disliked it either. I just didn't care. I had a job for rent and food. I don't like being hungry and cold, so I found the most basic, unstimulating job I could find to meet the minimum standards and go home. Then one day, everything changed. I slipped while cutting a box at work, and the razor sliced deep into my hand between my thumb and index finger. It hurt, and I felt a sudden twinge of anger. It was abrupt and startling, the pain and anger. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt. The emotion was foreign and suddenly euphoric. I looked into my hand leaking blood everywhere and realized something spectacular. I felt amazing. Impulsively, I took the razor and pushed it back into the wound. I groaned in pain and my whole body shook, but the euphoria was overwhelming. I just wanted to fucking feel something. I cut deeper and further down my hand as I cried out in pain. Blood flowed from my wound like a bursting volcano, and I suddenly orgasmed before black spots filled my vision and I passed out. The hospital stay was awkward. They said I had a seizure, but I didn't care. I just wanted to feel again. When I got home, I went straight to the bathtub with a razor. I cut deep into my thigh. The pain surged, but euphoria returned. This became my nightly routine. I cut, I came, I seized, and woke up covered in blood but filled with bliss, just to feel something. After a time, it started fading. I needed more. I stitched myself up, then cut it back open later, but when it wasn't enough, I decided to try it on someone else. I lured her, a young single mother with an ad about free baby supplies. I tied her to a chair and stood before her with my body riddled with vicious cuts in various states of infection. I took the razor and cut her. Blood sprang from the wound and filled me with euphoria. I cut her again, the refreshing smell of blood igniting my soul. I cut her and drank it. Then I cut myself and mixed our blood as the room changed colors, filling my vision with vivid red. I cut, I slashed, I bathed in blood until I seized violently and passed out. This time I didn't wake up till morning. The girl was cold to the touch. She's dead, but I don't care. I'm numb again, and all I can think of is just how I want to feel. I'll do anything just to fucking feel something like that again. Anything. There were bright flashes of red in the sky. It's as if someone was waving around a flare light from space, faint but noticeable. We all made UFO jokes and laughed as we nailed our tents into the ground. I knew for sure that there were 5 of us. We have all been friends since early middle school, and we're celebrating our high school graduation with this getaway camping trip. The flashes of red must have stopped randomly as we made conversations while fixing up our tents. Dave managed to put his tent together the fastest and told us he was going to find some branches for the fire. I remember how he worked with me at the local gas station last year. We used to do the night shift together, and it had made working at the desolate gas station much more fun than it was supposed to be. There was also Eric in the corner still reading his tent manual, fidgeting with his signature round glasses. I wasn't as close with Eric as I was with the others, but I still remember sitting with him in math class and copying his homework one time. Ava was also there talking with Sally, my cousin. Both had decided to team up and work on one tent at a time. I also have clear memories of them, hanging around at school in our usual places. In fact, I even knew Ava's younger brother as he used to beg to go with us wherever we went. I bring this up because I'm sure that there were 5 of us, including me, and that I knew everyone in the group. So Dave went to get some branches as we pulled out some foldable chairs and set them up around the fire pit. I remember feeling uneasy as the sun set and darkness began to consume the forest. The shadows of trees elongated around us as the minutes ticked by. Eric went to get a flashlight from his bag while we wondered what was taking Dave so long. He appeared soon after, the harsh rustling sounds of the bushes signifying his return. We were all buried in our chairs at this point, covered by our jackets. The temperature had dropped quickly and a slight breeze was beginning to pick up. "Geez, you guys weren't even bothered to pull out a chair for me," Dave said as he arranged all the branches in the pit. We had set up 5 chairs around the fire. I tried to rationalize the situation, but no matter how hard I focused, my head felt like it was underwater. I had perfect clarity up until that moment, but when I tried to focus on why 5 chairs were occupied when Dave hadn't sat down yet, my head seemed to just stop working as if something was reaching in and pulling out my thoughts. Instinctually, I felt even more uneasy now, and I had placed why. The whole forest had gone dead silent. I looked around at the faces of the others and could tell that they had felt the same. Eric was fidgeting with his fingers, trying to scan around the group and spot the extra person, but it was futile. I scanned every face, each etched with worry and frowning and frustration except for... "It's all right, I'll get the chair myself," Dave said, breaking the silence and somewhat alleviating the tension. I got up and offered to help him. He looked into my eyes and nodded knowingly. We headed away from the fire pit towards the tents, but I kept my eyes glued on our group. "How many people are here?" I whispered to Dave as he looked around and realized that we had indeed only packed 5 chairs. In fact, every person had brought with them their own chair. They were heavy to carry, and we wouldn't bring any extra needlessly. "There's 5, right? There's 5 chairs," Dave replied. His voice wavered as he spoke. "No, I just think maybe one of us forgot our chair," I said. My mind was struggling to address the issue head on and now sought to find rational excuses instead. I didn't quite feel in control of my thoughts. It felt like swimming in a dream, and if I had tried to force myself to think about who the 6th person was, my head would begin to throb. "Yeah, that sounds about right, actually," Dave said, relaxing and heading back to the group. When we walked back to the fire pit and circle of chairs, 2 chairs were empty, one for me and one for Dave. Everything was adding up now, even though we all agreed it wasn't before. Sally suggested that we were probably all tired after the long hike to get here and probably just needed some sleep. She could have been right. We were all sleep deprived from waking up very early that day to make it on time. Ava brought out the drinks. The whole 6-pack was emptied. We all moved closer to the crackling fire for warmth as we took sips from our cans and reminisced on memories of last year. Ava was in the middle of telling us about that one time she was home alone with weird things happening in her house when I got these sudden chills despite the pleasant warmth of the fire. What felt cozy and safe moments ago felt wrong now, all because I realized that there was a crucial detail I missed. "Who started the fire?" I asked, completely interrupting Ava in the middle of her story and breaking everyone else's immersion. Everyone looked momentarily annoyed until they realized they had no answer. Once again, I scanned the faces staring back at me, all barely illuminated by the light from the fire, all familiar and pale from fear. "Wasn't it you, Dave?" Eric asked. Dave shook his head. "I think the person standing behind Jenny did it," Sally said, looking over at me. I whipped my head around so quickly it hurt. My heart was pounding in my ears. There was nothing behind me except for the encompassing darkness of the woods. Staring at all those dark trees behind me made me feel exposed. I felt like a lost bird in a vast field. "Wait, I don't know," Sally said. Her eyes had gone wide and she was shaking visibly. She continued to look around frantically as Ava moved over to her, placing her hands on her shoulders and trying to calm her down. "I think we should leave this place," Ava stuttered. "Yeah, something just doesn't feel right, but I can't put my finger on it," Dave said. "But it's so dark out here in the forest now, we'd probably get lost if we leave now," someone else said. "Yeah, I think we should stay the night and leave as soon as possible tomorrow," Eric agreed. I tried to protest but realized Eric was right. The woods harbored an oppressive darkness within which navigation would be near impossible. "Let's not sleep in our separate tents just to be safe," Sally said. We all agreed. We only brought one-person tents with us, but we could all squeeze into 2 if we tried. That way no one would be alone at night. Following this conversation, we all got up and made our pairs. I went with Dave, and Sally, like always, went with Ava. Eric kept complaining that he didn't have a pair, but we assured him he did. He wouldn't accept it. I feel like at some point we all realized that there were only 5 of us, and suddenly we were all huddling up in the middle of the clearing. "Why do we keep thinking there are 6 of us here?" Eric asked. Sweat was dripping down his face despite the cold. We had nearly left him all alone on his own under the assumption that there was another person. My stomach turned as I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to mentally recap everyone here. My head throbbed, but I keep pushing it. There's me, Dave, Eric, Ava, Sally, and... I was pointing at each one of them as I said the name. I retched and emptied the contents of my stomach on the ground when I got past Sally. The left side of my head felt like there was a knife stuck in it. My vision was blurry. Dave held me up to stop me from collapsing, and we all wordlessly started to move towards the tents as someone put the fire out. Dave helped me into a tent while the 4 outside discussed what to do. I could only focus on snippets of the conversation as the excruciating pain beating against my skull came and went in waves. Sally had the brilliant idea of arranging 3 tents together so their openings faced together at right angles in a sort of U-shape so we could all sleep as close as possible, and also limit the entrance to our tents. Dave was about to go to help as they worked outside, but I clutched his hand and asked him to stay with me. The tents took some time to arrange. I started to feel a bit better once everyone got settled into their tents. A quick head count confirmed that there were 5 of us. Eric would have to sleep in his tent alone, but he was more comfortable with it since all the other tents were very close now. Looking back now, I think he was just trying to put a brave face on for us. I regret that moment deeply, letting him sleep in his tent alone. He was always less integrated in our group and knew that none of us would pair up with him. Just before going to bed, we all agreed to leave as soon as the sun rose in the morning. I remember taking one last look outside the tent in the forest before trying to fall asleep. The wind had picked up and the tree branches were swaying gently. Beyond our clearing was just pure darkness. It felt like the trees were closing in on me. With the faint moonlight illuminating our clearing, I turned my head to look over at the 2 tents we had left out and saw someone standing next to them. Despite the circumstances, sleep came quickly and easily. Ava's shrill scream woke me up in the middle of the night. Dave and I ripped our tent door open to find Sally and Ava looking into Eric's tent. We pushed them aside. Eric's sleeping bag was rolled up. He was still inside it, his head in the center, face contorted in utter agony. The rest of his body rolled up around it, with the blue fabric now dripping with dark blood. Dave zipped up the door of the tent. Ava was in shock. Her eyes had become glassy and unfocused. Sally was shaking her repeatedly, tears streaming down her face. Dave picked up his torch and yelled at us to get up and run. We left the campsite behind and entered the trail we had come from. The 5 of us huddled together, Dave leading in the front as he cast his weak flashlight over the path so we could see it. All we had to help us get through this 2-hour trail was a small white circle of light. Even the moon failed to illuminate our surroundings through the dense foliage. Ava tripped and fell, twisting her ankle. Someone said they knew how to splint it so we could keep going. They dragged her into the woods instead. It happened too quickly for any of us to process. Sally was about to run after Dave when Dave held her back. She struggled and managed to free herself, running into the trees to follow the echoes of Ava's screams. I was about to run after her, but Dave held me by the shoulders and shook me hard. "We need to get out of here, Jenny, please," he said. I hesitated but jolted into motion again when Sally's voice was cut off abruptly. She had been calling out Ava's name as she ran after her. Dave and I continued to run down the trail, trying to get to our car so we can get out of there. There was nothing we could do. At some point, there were 3 of us running up on the trail, Dave and I shoulder to shoulder while someone else followed us closely behind. "Dave, who's behind us?" I gasped. My heart was threatening to burst through my ribcage and my legs burned. He turned to me. Confusion transformed into fear on his face and then into rage. "You keep running," he told me as he produced a pocket knife from his pants. He handed me the car keys, which I nearly dropped. Then he turned around suddenly and jumped at whoever was behind us. I continued to run in fear as the sounds of a struggle grew behind me. I tripped and tumbled through the trail for what seemed like hours. I didn't allow myself to stop. I almost cried when the trail ended and I walked out into the familiar car park. Not wasting a second, I ran to the car and started it up, accelerating out of the forest and onto the highway within mere seconds. On the road, I immediately plugged my phone into its charger. After a few minutes, my phone had enough power for me to dial 911 to try and explain the situation. I don't think they believed my version of events, but they sent a car my way regardless. As I waited, the sun was finally starting to rise. When light lit up my car enough to see, I noticed the blank face of a stranger in my back seat. Waiting. I've been dead for 5 years. It happened at the age of 35. Though I've come to accept it, I will always feel that my life was stolen from me. I died when I spun off the road late one night, hitting a tree going 90 miles an hour. You could argue my death was self-inflicted, but you see, it should have never happened. That night, I caught my wife Jane in bed with my brother Michael. I stormed out of the house, unable to process what I had just seen. All I could think to do was drive. But shortly after I got onto the highway, I started having a panic attack and lost control. I didn't even have time to think before I barreled through the front windshield. Over the years, I've watched closely over my family. I watched with tears in my eyes as my baby sister graduated with her doctorate, and as my parents joyfully held their second grandchild. I watched my son celebrate his 13th birthday without me. I begrudgingly watched my wife and brother marry only a year after my death. They moved on quickly, had a baby of their own, and even had the audacity to name him after me. But I could tell that my death ate away at my brother. I'd watch him late at night after Jane would go to bed. On his best days, he'd down a dozen or so shots of whiskey. On his worst days, it was closer to 20. He'd never been a drinker before. Over time, I started hearing the echoes of Michael praying for my forgiveness, asking for a sign that I still loved him. I never responded, but he persisted. Church visits, meetings with mediums, even a Ouija board one drunken night. I couldn't understand why he suddenly needed this. One day I realized. He came home in tears and embraced Jane. I knew something was wrong, he choked out. Liver failure, the doctor says it's end stage. He was trying to repent before he died. I continued to ignore his cries for me, but then the day came. He was hospitalized after weeks of rapidly declining. He was so weak he couldn't get out of bed. The doctor urged my family to say their final goodbyes. I could tell minutes before his death that it was coming. As he took his final breath, he pleaded for me one final time, reaching his arms out in the air. At that moment, I forgave him. "Michael, I am here with you." The corners of his mouth turned upwards as I watched his soul leave his body. But then, pitch black. I woke up in a coughing fit, my chest ready to explode as black smoke filled my lungs. My skin prickled with the heat of 1,000 suns. I looked up. A tall, shadowy figure engulfed in red flames stood in front of me. Your brother fulfilled his end of the deal. A soul for a soul.